All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this month's Portals Community Call. I'm Jason Gumbert from MS Dynamics World. As always, pleased to be able to host these events. I'm here once again with Nicholas Hayduk, our other host and main presenter. He has a great topic for you all today. As always, we discuss the focus topic, but we also take your questions and comments. Look for the questions block and feel free to enter your questions, ideas, thoughts, really whatever portals related stuff is on your mind. At any point, we'll be keeping an eye on that. We are also recording today's event. So with that, I think I can get out of the way and hand things over to Nick.
All right, thank you, Jason. Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about 10 things every Power Pages Pro coder should know. So why don't we get started with our kind of usual thing here. So if this is the first time you're joining us today, welcome. My name is Nicholas Hayduk. I'm the president and software engineer with Engineered Code Consulting Inc., based here in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. Microsoft MVP that's been specializing in Power Pages for the last close to 15 years now. My career began with ADX Studio, which was the company that originally built Power Pages and was acquired by Microsoft in 2015. If you aren't already connected with me on LinkedIn, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, you can also follow us on Twitter. We have our YouTube channel where we post tips every Tuesday, as well as the recordings for this and other videos. We've got our blog. Just put out a blog post this week about the handling multi-select load events, which was a pretty ugly exercise. So if you want to see some ugly code, you can check that out. As well as crm.audio is where we have our Refresh the Cache podcast. So all our stuff is typically focused on Power Pages, portals within the Power Platform area. So if you're looking for content related to Power Pages, there's a few different options there for you. All right, as always, want to just say thanks to Jason and the team at MS Dynamics World for their support. I think if I'm correct, this is call number 50. So we've been doing this. We started this kind of around I think it was in 2020. I think it was maybe right before COVID was about to hit. So yeah, 50 calls. I don't know if we thought it would last this long, but here we are, and no plans to stop anytime soon. So yeah, thanks for joining us on our 50th call, and thanks to Jason for all of his support over the last few years to get us to this point. So what's our agenda? As usual, we'll go through the recent portal news. I think I've said this a few times, but if you go back to some of the calls from 3 or 4 years ago, it was a bit of an exercise to find news topics, whereas now I don't know, it seems like every month we've got 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 new things that have come from the Power Pages team. So lots of news to go over this month. We'll then talk about today's topic, which again is 10 things every Power Pages Pro coder should know. We'll then talk about the date and time of our next call. And then we'll leave some time for Q&A. But as Jason mentioned, if you do have any questions during the presentation, please just drop those in the questions block, and I'll do my best to pay attention and to answer those questions as they come up. All right, Portals news. What do we got? So again, the best source for your news is the Power Platform. There's the Power Pages blog. New URL for that. It used to be at powerpages.microsoft.com or kind of on its own thing. So a new place for the Power Pages blog. You'll see it. It's at microsoft.com/powerplatform/blog/Power Pages. So same content, new location, new UI. But so as you can see here, what do we got? Like seven new items that have been blogged about since we last met less than a month ago. So like I said, lots of stuff coming up. So the first one here is a new site search with generative AI summarization. So I haven't had a chance to really play with this yet, but I don't think there's going to be too many people unhappy to see enhancements with the site search functionality in Power Pages. And so a lot of things that we're seeing these days from Microsoft is around the AI and the Copilot stuff. So they've introduced some AI features to site search, so that's always a welcome addition. They've also introduced the Flex container, so that's a new component within the Design Studio that kind of lets you build some different different blocks of stuff within the Power Pages Design Studio when you're creating your page layouts, as well as the ability to add breadcrumbs in the Design Studio. So that's again another component that you can add inside the page editors. You can add your breadcrumbs, which is your trail of pages, which kind of represents the hierarchy of kind of the whatever page you're on, and its parent and its parent and its parent all the way back to the home page. If you haven't used breadcrumbs before, they're a common UI element in websites, and it's nice to have something that kind of handles that automatically for you. Within the Power Platform Admin Center, the licensing dashboard provides environment and site level views of licensing. Power Pages licensing is always a fun topic. One of the challenges over the last number of years was, just finding out what licensing was being, what were you consuming, which sites were consuming it, and the stats on that were sometimes hard to come by, or it required you to actually ask Microsoft and they could possibly run some reports. So more and more enhancements coming in the Power Platform Admin Center regarding the licensing dashboard. So giving you the data that you need in order to plan for what licenses you need coming up, and to ensure that you're compliant with the licensing requirements from Microsoft. PowerFX. So for those of you from the world of Canvas apps or from the world of Power Automate, you're maybe already familiar with PowerFX. PowerFX is a low-code language. Probably, if you haven't seen it before, it very much is kind of influenced from the world of kind of Excel formulas. So the syntax looks kind of similar to what you might see in Excel. So that support has been added to Power Pages. So you can now use PowerFX directly within the Design Studio in Power Pages. You can use it to read data from Dataverse. Within Power Pages, you have access to who the current contact is. So you can essentially view PowerFX as an alternative to Liquid. I've been asked a few times, is this kind of the end of Liquid? Does this replace Liquid? I don't think there's any intention to eliminate Liquid. Liquid is very much baked into many of the different sites right now, so I don't think that there would be any plans to remove it. To be honest, there really haven't been a whole lot of enhancements to Liquid. All of the enhancements are just essentially adding support for Liquid to new features that are coming out, and so I honestly think that the Liquid is going to continue to be there, continue to get the same level of love that it's gotten over the last number of years, which is, minimal. But I really think that you'll see Liquid and PowerFX remain kind of both on equal terms. But certainly for people coming from some of the other products like Power Automate or Canvas apps that are already familiar with PowerFX, it may eliminate the need or greatly reduce the need for you to learn Liquid, and you can probably, for the most part, stick with PowerFX. So it's cool that we're trying to kind of bring all these products together and consolidate all the different technologies that are out there. So nice to see that PowerFX has been added to Power Pages. It's been something that's been talked about for a number of years now. So great to see that it has arrived. Next, there's a few enhancements for the VS Code for web. So there's a new kind of actions area, which allows you to actually preview your site directly from Visual Studio, from VS Code. So yeah, you're able to preview as well as open up the management app. So similar to how in the Design Studio you got those buttons to open up the management app or to preview the site. If you're more traditionally working in VS Code for web, you have those links right there. So you don't have to kind of flip back to another tab to preview the site. You can do it directly from VS Code for web. As well as some quick open file and text search. I believe that was there for desktop before, but now that's been added to VS Code for web. So just some easier ways to navigate and search for files within the VS Code for web experience, which is, to be honest, that's my primary interface for dealing with Power Pages. So glad to see we've got the enhancements for the VS Code for web. And finally, there was one blog post on that indicated that there are some enhancements to the Copilot Pro Code experience. So, for example, one of the kind of common use cases for asking Copilot to generate code for you, you can say, hey, I want to add validation to my form, and say, hey, give me the code to validate, say, the postal code for this particular field. And that essentially that was created by Microsoft, the product team, training the Copilot model. And so it sounds like they're continuing to train it, give it more, make that model better. So they did say that it should do a better job of I think it was targeting the correct fields and providing you the validation that you're looking for. So that's something that, again, those models are continually trained and enhanced. So it sounds like they've updated the model a bit for the generate pro code capabilities within Copilot. So like I said, lots of stuff there. We had the same similar kind of a whole bunch of items last month as well. So lots of new things coming with Power Pages, and I don't know if we'll see a slowdown here maybe over the summer, but yeah, lots of things coming. I would say the big news this month would be that Power Effects. That's something that's been people have been waiting for a long time. I think it was announced in a blog post last month, but it wasn't really available, or at least I couldn't see it yet, and now it does. Like I see it now in my environment. So yeah, go ahead and go start trying and seeing how you like that Power Effects integration. All right, next, okay, let's jump into today's topic, which is 10 things every Power Pages pro coder should know. So I want to kind of set some expectations here. So the purpose of today's call is not really to dive deep into any of these topics. We got 10 topics that we're going to talk about. We roughly have about 30 minutes for this. So that's, if you do the math, that's about 3 minutes per topic. So the goal today is not necessarily to dive deep into these topics, but for pretty much all of these topics, we do have other calls that are specific on those topics. So today what I wanted to do was kind of give, if you're kind of new to Power Pages, but you're a pro code person, it could sometimes be difficult to know where to even start, or know, like, what are the things I should be starting to learn first. So I was kind of planning to do this call to give that high level overview of, hey, here are 10 things that you should focus on. Again, all these topics will have kind of a full call dedicated to them, most likely kind of in our in the history of our community calls, or there'll be blog posts, or there'll be all sorts of content all over the internet, so you can dive deep into these topics. But I find sometimes the struggle with Power Pages is there's just so much content out there, and it's hard to know, okay, what's the most important, what should I start with? So I figured I'd take today's call to say, okay, here are the 10 things as a pro code developer you should understand. If you're just getting started with pro code development in Power Pages, maybe you're coming from other parts of the Power Platform, or you're coming from elsewhere, what are the things that you should focus on as you're getting started? So let's get into our list here. So the first one is lists and forms. Now, lists and forms themselves are not, that is the low code or the no code side of Power Pages. However, I do see that often when someone comes from a pro code, kind of come from the pro code world, they'll often kind of overlook, or they'll dismiss the lists and forms functionality, which I think is a mistake. I think what you want to do is you want to use pro code when you can, or when you have to, but use the low code and no code stuff when you can. So I think understanding what is possible with lists and forms is crucial for the pro code developers, so that they know when not to reinvent the wheel. So as much as possible on the projects that we're delivering for our customers, we're trying to use the lists and forms as much as possible, and then extending the lists and forms with things like custom JavaScript or PCF controls. So I really think it's important that as a Power Pages Pro Code developer, that you have a firm understanding of what you can and cannot do with lists and forms, especially forms. Like lists, okay, they're tables, like it's pretty, like it doesn't take long to kind of get familiar with that. But I think there's so much that you see in forms, or I see a lot of pro code being developed for forms that just isn't necessary. And I'll give you an example. Right before this call, we had a call with some of our from the people that we have in our Power Pages training program, and the question was, what we want to do is we want to mark records. When rows are created via Power Pages, we want there to be some sort of indication that those records were created from Power Pages, because there could be records coming from a bunch of different places, and we want to know that those came from our portal. And so the question is like, is there, what's the best way of doing that? Do we have to write JavaScript to do that? And so you absolutely could write JavaScript that does that. You could put a field on the form and then use JavaScript to set that field to something and then hide that field. And then when they click submit, that data will get passed back. But if you didn't kind of take the time to do the research within the forms functionality, you'd probably miss the fact that that is completely possible using the form metadata. So you can absolutely, using the set value on save, which is specifically designed for the purpose of when that form is submitted, you can choose essentially whatever columns you want. You can set data specifically. So you can use that to set the contact, a contact relationship to the currently logged in person. You can use it to set the current date and time, or you can use it to set a specific value on the form. So for example, if you wanted to just say have a checkbox that says, is this, was this created from the portal? Or maybe there's a record source option set where you have one of the options as portal. You can absolutely do that with the save value on save form or functionality in the form metadata. That way you don't have this JavaScript that's hiding and showing fields and kind of, just kind of a hacky way of getting that value state. Will it work? Absolutely, but there's a much easier no-code way of doing that. So I think there's lots of requirements where if you are a pro code developer, you're presented with these requirements. Number one is, how can I accomplish this without writing code? And so becoming familiar with the lists and forms functionality is, I think, key to be a really strong Power Pages pro coder. Okay, before I go to the next one here, we got a question from Gavin. It says, in the news section, you mentioned PowerFX. Our organization is still largely editing portal records directly rather than using the Power Pages Design Studio to modify pages. They write a lot of web templates. They use a combination of Liquid and JavaScript. PowerFX now in the Design Studio, is it possible to write directly into the web templates? That's a great question. I honestly, I haven't used, I went into the PowerFX stuff the other day just to, because it said it was available, and sometimes us folks here in Canada don't get access to it. So I haven't actually looked at how, like when you add PowerFX to a form, like how that actually gets saved. But if we've got time here at the end, I can just, I'll try that live here because I think I've got an instance up that I can share on my screen. So why don't we give that a try? Because my guess is probably yes, because if that PowerFX is being added to the page somewhere, like it's just gonna be part of the web template or the content. So my guess is yes, but we'll see. We'll take a look at that here at the end of the presentation. Okay, the next thing that I think it's important for Power Pages Pro coders to know is what are the languages that are most commonly used with Power Pages. Now, with Power Pages, and we'll talk about companion apps here in a little bit, I mean, basically any language that ever exists in terms of programming can be incorporated somehow into Power Pages using a companion app, but these are the ones that are the most commonly used. So if someone was, say, new to development and they want to get into Power Pages, what would be the languages that they should know? Well, obviously we're talking about web development, so HTML, CSS. Obviously, I think the number one language, like whether it's Power Pages or not, if someone asks me what language should I learn, JavaScript seems like it's kind of the that would be the language to know these days with everything kind of web-based. So JavaScript, of course, TypeScript if you like the TypeScript stuff. But JavaScript is really like probably the most important language to know. We've got Liquid. We've already kind of talked about Liquid and PowerFX. Those are the languages you need to know, as well as because obviously we're living in the Microsoft world, we're living in the .NET world. Most of the server-side code that you're going to be running into, whether it's in plugins or companion apps, most commonly those are built using C#. So those would be the languages that I would be focusing on. Again, if you're kind of new to development or you're trying to figure out, which skills should you be focusing on when it comes to Power Pages Pro code, that would be the list there. Again, the big one would be JavaScript. Liquid is, again, not necessarily proprietary to Power Pages, but there's a good chance that unless you're working in Shopify or a kind of a handful of other platforms, there's a good chance you haven't run into Liquid, but it's pretty straightforward. It's very similar to other languages like Twig that exists in the PHP world. So that one's pretty easy to pick up as well. But yeah, the big one's going to be, if you're going to be a really strong Power Pages developer, probably JavaScript is where you're going to need to focus. And it's used in PCF controls, lots of places where JavaScript being used. So those are the languages that I would say if you're getting into Power Pages development, that's the list of languages and technologies to understand. So we've talked about the languages, but what about, on top of those languages, we often have these different frameworks so that we don't have to necessarily get into all of the intricacies of, and we'll look at the first one here, which is Bootstrap, of all kind of the building responsive sites. There's these frameworks that exist to make our lives a lot easier. So when we have a Power Pages site, we have Bootstrap. Bootstrap's included, it's there. Now, what we're just seeing now is Bootstrap version 5. Bootstrap version 5 is generally available. New sites created today, I would strongly recommend using version 5. But I'm sure the stats probably say that of the real sites that are in production right now, the vast majority are still using Bootstrap version 3. So as a Power Pages developer, having a solid understanding of Bootstrap, whether it's version 3 or 5, that's a must. That's how that's the UI framework being used by Power Pages. And so when you're developing even things like custom PCF controls, if you want that control to feel like it's a part of your Power Pages site, a native component within your Power Pages site, Bootstrap is the way to do that. So certainly important that as a pro coder that you're familiar with the Bootstrap framework. The next one would be jQuery. Now, jQuery is, it's a little dated. Back when I started my career 15 years ago, it was the kind of the cool kid in town. Not used as widely. I mean, I still think you'll see it on the vast majority of websites because it's included in platforms like WordPress. But I think I see a lot of people now kind of going out of their way to try and avoid using jQuery, and that I get. If you're kind of building something from scratch, it may not be as necessary for the cross-browser compatibility as it used to be. That being said, jQuery is included in Power Pages. It is often used in the examples from Microsoft, the examples that say I put out on my blog. Often the community content that's out there you'll see does include jQuery. So whether you are in love with jQuery or not, I do think if you're going to be a Power Pages developer, you should at least be familiar enough with the syntax so that you can leverage all that community content, or you understand the code that comes out of the box from Microsoft. So I think at least a basic knowledge of jQuery is an important skill set for pro coders to have. Even if you're not a huge fan of jQuery, it's there, and I think you kind of got to live with it and embrace it. And I think that's a skill set that's important. Now, the next one here I'm going to mention is React. Now, React is not included necessarily kind of out of the box with Power Pages, or it is used a little bit potentially in the PCF controls that Microsoft may have built, but there's kind of no native support for React. There's no native kind of tooling or anything like that specific to Power Pages, but there's no reason that you can't use React yourself when building things for Power Pages, especially if you're going to be building PCF controls. If you're building PCF controls, most of the Microsoft examples will be built using React. So I think, if you're looking at whether it's Vue or whether it's Angular or whether it's React, if you're kind of agnostic to in that larger debate, my recommendation would be to kind of go down the React route, because that's kind of the angle that we see most people taking in the Power Pages space. So that's going to be kind of the more universal language in Power Pages is using React. So for those more complex UI, if you're trying to do something a little more sophisticated than either say vanilla JavaScript or jQuery, my recommendation would be to go with React. But like I said, other frameworks that you want to bring yourself, Power Pages, for the most part, doesn't say you can't do that. It's, if you want to use Angular, you can talk to the people who built the events portal for Dynamics 365 marketing. You can use Angular. We've built things using Vue back in the day, so you can bring your own frameworks. But for the most part, what you're going to see most people doing are Bootstrap, jQuery, and React. So just be aware that Power Pages isn't going to restrict you for the most part, but there are ones that are more common in the community than others. Okay, so as a developer, I think it's important that you understand how the permissions work when it comes to talking with Dataverse. So Power Pages is a web application that uses Dataverse as its database, and most of what people are building with Power Pages is about talking to data that exists in Dataverse, whether it's natively or via virtual, using connectors, virtual tables, that sort of thing. So understanding how the permissions model works can save you a lot of headaches, because often we'll see people say, hey, I wrote this liquid code. It works in the XRM toolbox when I run the fetch XML. Well, like, why doesn't this work on my Power Pages site? And it's because they haven't set up the permissions properly. So when it comes to permissions on Power Pages, it's important to understand that when someone logs into Power Pages, they're a contact. That contact then gets web roles. These are all concepts that are configured, whether it's in the Power Pages Design Studio or the management app. But the permissions in Power Pages are distinct, separate, unrelated to security roles that exist in Dataverse. So users and security roles have nothing to do with contacts and web roles that exist for Power Pages. So when we talk about accessing data in Dataverse, the table permissions is what we have to be kind of worried about. And so there, in contrast with the Dataverse security roles, which are kind of built on the basis of who owns that record and how is the owner of that record, are they in the same business unit as me or a different business unit from me? There's that concept. In Power Pages, the permissions are primarily based on, I'm logged in as a contact, am I related to that record? Whether directly or through other records. So as an example, I have a contact record, perhaps I'm related to a parent account, and that parent account may have cases. So you set up permissions that says, I have access to all the cases related to my parent account. There's a direct relationship between contact to account and then to cases. Those relationships link me to those cases, and that's what I see on Power Pages. So again, if you don't have access to those records, you may run a fetch XML query, but Power Pages is doing the security trimming behind the scenes. So you need to understand, how do you assign those roles to people? What permissions can you assign, and how to get that all working? Because those table permissions are enforced in lists and forms, they're enforced in the web API, and they're enforced in Liquid, and I guess now Power Effects as well. So it's important as a developer, if you're writing code that's going to be talking with, say, the web API, that you're understanding how those permissions work. Otherwise, what we see happening is it doesn't work. Someone Googles a little bit and they see, oh, I got to add permissions, and they start creating global permissions that expose a whole bunch of things that shouldn't be exposed. And the code works because they, instead of giving access to the one row that they need, they've now given access to all rows in that table. And even though the code works, you've got this giant security hole there that is easy to miss. So certainly understanding the table permissions. There's also page permissions, so that's whether a user can view a page or not, which is separate from the Dataverse, whether someone has access to a row or not in Dataverse. So I think it's important that you, as a developer, you understand the permissions model that is associated with Power Pages, specifically the table permissions, which are usually key in any Power Pages site. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the techniques. So if you're getting into Power Pages development as a pro coder, what are the things that you can do, and what might possibly be asked of you? So I already talked about earlier about you have lists and forms, and let's not reinvent the wheel. If you need to display a list of records, use those if you can, but extend them where you need to. So that's a very common thing that you could be asked to do, is extending how the list functionality works. So the way you do that is you can handle the onload event of a list. So an example might be, hey, we want to highlight the background of a cell in our thing based on the status. So if the status is, the status might be red, green, or blue, and we want to have the background color of that cell match that color. So that's something that's very straightforward to do with some JavaScript. You can handle the onload event of the list. One thing to know about lists is that all the paging is done asynchronously. So the page loads once, and then if you have multiple pages of records in your table, all of that happens through Ajax. So you don't get a new page load event. You get load events on the list for each page in the list, not the overall page, not the overall web page. So you just got to make sure you're handling the right event there, but pretty straightforward to do things that interact with the table that represents that list, adding columns, removing columns if you need to, changing the data in the cells, that sort of stuff. So very common thing to be asked. Probably the most common thing we see that's asked is extending forms. So whether that's some custom validation that you can't do out of the box, especially since things like business rules are not supported in Power Pages. So there's lots of validation that you can't do without using your own custom JavaScript. That being said, we talked about the form metadata before to do things like saving data. There's also things you can do with form metadata like regular expression validation, marking fields as required. There's lots you can do there without writing JavaScript. But again, often we see validation needing JavaScript. So learning how to interact with the form, the big thing to know there is that unlike with model-driven apps where there's an API that you need to use in order to interact with the form, Power Pages doesn't have any specific API. It's a little bit more kind of traditional web development where you are allowed to directly interact with the DOM in Power Pages. So that's a common thing to do, is kind of custom validation, as well as custom controls. So you can do that with whether it's PCF control, or if you don't want to use PCF controls, maybe you just want to add a jQuery widget that replaces a text box with some sort of like look ahead or combo box. You can do that with JavaScript as well. Like I mentioned, there's PCF controls, so you can use PCF controls in a few different ways. You can use it to replace a particular field on a form. You can use PCF controls to replace a list. So if you want to do your own custom implementation of a list, whether that's a full list or a subgrid, you can use PCF controls for that, as well as you can use PCF controls just kind of arbitrarily. You can kind of put them wherever you want. There's a liquid syntax where you just say, hey, I want to display my PCF control here as well. So if you're building a kind of a single page application where you're building kind of a complex user interface and you want to build it, say, as a React app, you can do that via PCF control. You build it all, you bundle it as a PCF control, and then you can include that PCF control on your page using the liquid syntax. When we talk about interacting with Dataverse, we do have Liquid, but we've also got a web API. So you can use the web API to query Dataverse. You can use the web API to update, delete, create, read, all that sort of stuff. Like you have full CRUD capabilities to Dataverse. It essentially mirrors the the web API available for Dataverse, although there are some, like you can't run custom actions, and there's some things you can't do in the Power Pages web API. But again, a common thing that we're asking pro code developers to do is to interact with the web API through the JavaScript that they're writing on their Power Pages site. The other thing is plugins. So this would just be the traditional Dataverse plugin. So when a record is created or updated in Dataverse, because Power Pages is built on top of Dataverse, its operations, when you save a record there, it's going directly into Dataverse. There's no, there's no additional database with synchronization or anything like that. So you can, perform some advanced validation in a plugin. If you need to do server-side validation, you can do it there. If your Dataverse plugin throws an exception on the create of a record, that will bubble all the way back to Power Pages because that operation is being performed directly by Power Pages. So you can perform validation in plugins or that sort of thing. So if you're already familiar with writing Dataverse plugins, those are often applicable to your Power Pages projects as well. And then this last technique I want to talk about is companion apps. We talked about this, I think it was a couple months ago maybe, but we had a whole session on what a companion app is, how to build one. But the really short story here is that a companion app is a web service that you build yourself, and then you can talk to your web service from JavaScript on Power Pages. So that's super useful if you need to do things that say aren't supported in the out-of-the-box web API, or you're trying to talk to a third-party service. You can build that companion app that allows you to make the calls to the companion app, and then that companion app, which is your server-side code, that can kind of do whatever it wants. The key there is that the reason to have that companion app is that you can control the authentication. So you can request a token from Power Pages and make authenticated secure requests to your companion app, so that you can have a secure API for interacting with. So often if you're working with, say, a third-party service, there won't be a way for you to call it securely directly from JavaScript. So that's why we have that companion app piece in the middle, so that you can securely call the companion app, which can then call whatever APIs you need with the secrets that you may have. So these are the common things that developers are being asked to do: extending lists and forms, writing PCF controls, writing JavaScript that interacts with the web API, writing plugins, or probably the most complex of those are writing companion apps. But those are things that you typically, if I were to hire you for our team and you say, hey, I'm a pro coder, those are the typical common tasks that we'd be having you work on. Okay, so as a Power Pages pro coder, I do think it's important that you understand the data structure that exists for Power Pages. So this data structure, there's the enhanced data model and the standard data model. The enhanced data model is a new version that is solution aware to allow you to do your ALM, which we will talk about. So the data structure in terms of websites and web pages and web files, in the new enhanced data model, it still exists, but it's actually represented as virtual tables. So I don't really want to get too much into that today. But essentially what you have these different tables. So you have a table that represents all the different websites. One Dataverse instance can hold many portals. I think maybe it was, last I saw was maybe up to 50, but it might even be more than that. There's no kind of theoretical limit. I don't know where that 50 came from, but you can have multiple websites within a single Dataverse instance, and then all the web pages on the site are represented by the web pages table. A web page uses a page template. That page template then defines how the content of the page is being displayed, and you can define that using a web template. There's also web files. You can use that to upload Word documents or images or JavaScript files. So understanding as a developer, okay, when I'm going to create I've been asked to create this single page application, how am I going to do it? I'm going to create a web page with a page template. That page template is going to use web templates. I'm going to upload my files using web files. Like there's all these kind of different ways to do it. And the other thing that can be very confusing is, let's just say you're asked to write some JavaScript that updates, some custom validation for a form. Well, there's about 5 different places that you can actually put that JavaScript. You can put it, say, in the header or footer of the website. You can put it on within the web page. You can put it within the form itself. There's all these different places that you can put it. And so understanding the pros and cons of each one of those options, I think, is important. I do have some kind of a series of blog posts about where you can put your JavaScript and where I prefer to put it. But some of the things that you have to keep in mind is that, if you put it on, say, the web page, the JavaScript kind of ends up at the bottom of the markup. If you put it on the form, it appears higher up in the markup. So just the order of that, depending on, is jQuery defined yet or not? Like there's kind of all those different kind of complications. So understanding, the structure, the data structure behind the Power Pages content, I think is important, because I do see that kind of tripping people up where they'll just kind of throw it somewhere and it will work, but they don't really understand what, why does it work there and not somewhere else. I think it's important that you kind of understand the structure of Power Pages. Okay, what do we got next here? So interfaces. So if you're a Power Pages pro coder, where do you actually type in your code? What applications do you use? So as I mentioned earlier, VS Code, and specifically for me, the VS Code for web is definitely my go-to interface these days for interacting with Power Pages data. So VS Code is a nice kind of lightweight code editing tool, and if you're using the desktop version of VS Code, what you do is you use the pack, which is the Power Platform CLI, which allows you to download your website code. You can then edit it, and then there's a command to re-upload that. So that's the kind of easiest way to interact with your code. Now, for me, I'm usually lazy, and I'll just use the VS Code for web because I don't have to worry about uploading and download. I just click the button, it opens up in another tab, and now I've got VS Code, the VS Code interface in my browser for interacting directly with my Power Pages site code. That works great for the JavaScript and the CSS and the web API and the HTML, the Liquid. That's where you can do that. Now, before that VS Code integration became available, my go-to interface was the Portal Code Editor in the XRM Toolbox. A very similar type of experience, definitely focused on the pro code side. And if you've already got connections to, like if you're already using the XRM Toolbox, you can kind of have the interface open. If you've already got it open and everything's all in one place, so that's still a great tool. So those would be, for most people, they kind of pick one or the other. As a pro coder, you're probably still using the Design Studio a little bit. So you do have to be aware of the Design Studio. You might be using it to clear the cache a little bit. There's the management app, which is either, if you're using the standard data model, will be known as the Portal Management app. If you're using the enhanced data model, you're going to be using the Power Pages Management app. So that's the model-driven app that allows you to control most of the settings. You can do your JavaScript and HTML in there, but I would highly advise you to stick with VS Code instead. And then if you're doing the C# development, we talked about whether it's the plugins or you're building a companion app, you'll often be using something like Visual Studio. So those are the different interfaces. Generally, you're using, like for me, for the most part, I'm using VS Code. Often I'll have the Design Studio open to kind of clear the cache if necessary, and then the management app if I'm doing some low-code stuff. So lots of different interfaces, usually kind of all open all at one time. Okay, question here. So Gavin, so regarding data structure, if we have built up a library of useful JavaScript tools for the portal, then what is the recommended way of storing it so that it's accessible from multiple locations, such as custom JavaScript on basic form and web templates? Currently, we use content snippets to store utility functions and include those snippets in a web template using Liquid. So I would probably, like, if you have a library of useful JavaScript tools, I would, there's a few different options. So one is you could host those in a web file. The nice thing about putting them in a web file is that the performance is going to be, I don't think anyone's going to notice, but by putting them into a web file, that gives you a single URL that's going to get cached across your requests. So if you start including your JavaScript as content snippets, or we'd often just do it as web templates. Like if you're going to throw it in somewhere, we throw it in a web template, and then you can include the web template using Liquid. The challenge with that is that it just kind of bloats the page. So wherever you put it, that shows up on the that code is included in the page request. Whereas if you put it into a web file or a separate page, you can reference that web file, and that web file gets cached. So your script reference isn't going to be an extra request. It's going to be a request the first time you reference it, but it's going to keep the overall size of your page down. So if you do have a library of things, I would recommend, whether it's in a web file or you can create a web page that you put into a web template and you create a web page that is essentially a JavaScript file. One of those two, I think, is going to give you it's kind of best practice to not put a whole bunch of JavaScript inline on your page as much as possible. That being said, I don't think anyone's ever going to notice the difference in terms of performance. So I don't think what you're doing is like the end of the world or anything, but probably slightly better performance by sticking it into a file that can get cached and not kind of bloating that page request. Okay, how much time we got here? All right, we're doing okay. So Copilot. So we've got a kind of a series of Copilot tips on YouTube that's going on right now. Copilot's available in VS Code and VS Code for web. So from a pro code perspective, there's a code explain feature. So if you're in VS Code, you can essentially right click on some code and say, hey, tell me what this does. And it does a good job of kind of summarizing. So this is great for people who are new to Power Pages, or they might be taking over someone else's code, and they can have Copilot explain to you what the code is doing. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a code generation feature. So you can say, hey, give me the code that validates this field, or give me the web API call to create a record in this table. So especially for people who are new to Power Pages, and in the olden days, we would have tried to find a blog post that kind of gave us what we were looking for. Copilot can save you the hassle of kind of looking around and give you something that's a little bit more in context of your experience. So the code explain and the code generation features are helpful kind of Copilot features for pro coders. Okay, the next thing that unfortunately pro coders need to know about is ALM. Which is essentially, in this case, when we're talking about ALM, we're going to say it's how to move your work between environments. So you're doing your work hopefully in dev and you're pushing it up to test or UAT in production. The challenge with Power Pages, and again, I think we've had multiple sessions on this. The challenge with Power Pages is that a lot of the data, or a lot of the work we're doing is actually data in Dataverse. Now with the enhanced data model, you can include some of that in solutions. So one of the options for your ALM is to move things across in solutions. You've also got the ability to use a tool like the configuration migration tool to move your data across, or there's a tool in the XRM toolbox, the portal record mover, for doing that as well. But I guess the key thing here is when you're writing your code, you have to think about, okay, once I write this code, how is that code going to make it into the next upstream environment? Am I going to put it into a web file that's going to move? Am I going to just host it? Say if I'm writing a JavaScript file, I could take that JavaScript file, put it into Azure Blob Storage, and just reference it on my Power Pages site. Like, what are my different options, and how is this going to move between all the different environments? Especially if you're working on a project where it's been all kind of low code, no code stuff before, and then you're jumping in to add a little bit of functionality. How is this going to move across? That's one reason why PCF controls are nice, because PCF controls are included in solutions, and it makes it easy to move them as part of your ALM process. So just when you're picking, how you're going to accomplish a task, just always be thinking about how is this going to be moved across in our ALM process, whatever method you happen to pick. Okay, caching. This is something that everybody who works with Power Pages needs to know about. And probably if you've spent any time with Power Pages, you probably do know about it now. And so the thing is that Power Pages it's a web server in Azure that uses Dataverse as the database. So there's literally an Azure web app. When you spin up a portal, Microsoft spins up an Azure web app. You get your own Azure web app. It's kind of isolated to you, and it talks back to Dataverse using the Dataverse APIs. Now, your Power Pages site would be unbearably slow if every single time you opened up a page, it had to request all the data that it needs from Dataverse. That includes the web page content, all the rows, all that sort of stuff. So caching exists so that when requests are made from the web app to Dataverse, that there's a caching layer there so that not all the requests have to be made over and over and over again. However, that means that if you make changes directly to Dataverse, so if you make changes to Dataverse not through the Power Pages web app, that caching layer can get out of date. So for example, if you make changes to Power Pages data via a model-driven app, that's directly to Dataverse and that's not talking to the Power Pages web app. If you have background processes or Power Automate flows that modify data in Dataverse, Power Pages, the web app, doesn't know about that. If you have a console app, or you're using XRM Toolbox, or if you're using anything that directly accesses the Dataverse APIs, your Power Pages web app doesn't know about those changes. So as far as it's concerned, its cache is still valid. It has no reason to believe that its cache is not accurate, and so it won't, it will continue to act as if that data which has been changed hasn't been changed. So it's important to note that the SLA for cache invalidation, so the SLA means how long after a change is made in Dataverse will Power Pages know about it. And so the SLA is 15 minutes. So it's not that that cache stays around for days or weeks or months. It stays around for at most 15 minutes. And honestly, in practice, it's usually much shorter than that. Often it's just a few seconds. But if it's a few minutes, you can't call Microsoft and complain. They've said that it can be up to 15 minutes, so you have to plan for that. So there are some techniques that you can use to somewhat get around the caching, but for the most part, there's no silver bullet there. You have to be aware that if you are architecting a solution that, say, for example, uses Power Automate flows in the backend to do some of the work, that the work that the Power Automate flow may not be reflected on the website for up to 15 minutes. So our best advice is embrace that, plan for the cache. All it usually takes is some messaging to the user saying, hey, your request has been received. It may take a few minutes to be reflected, whatever you need to do. But there is no like simple way to just be like, hey, forget what you know. There's some maybe workarounds, some hacks that you could use in certain situations, but there's no kind of silver bullet, hey, let's clear the cache. Now, when you're doing development, when you use the preview button in the Design Studio, that does clear the cache, but it also means your site takes a while to load because it's clearing the entire cache. You don't want to be constantly doing that in production, and there's no API to do that automatically. So you can't say, well, once my Power Automate flow is done, just clear the cache for the website. That would be very bad. So you can't do that. But again, when you're developing, when you're architecting your Power Pages logic, especially if you're using whether it's plugins or Power Automate flows, background processes, Dataverse APIs, companion apps, anything that talks to Dataverse without going through the Power Pages web app, you have to be aware of caching because it can certainly throw a wrench in things. Okay, so those were my 10 things. I have one small bonus because it's a bit of a more advanced topic, and this would be something that you would do if you're going to be doing a lot of Power Pages development, and that is the source code release. So Microsoft, way back in the day, I think it was like 2017, provided the source code to Power Pages as something you could download. Now, as I said, it's old, 2017, but honestly, a lot of that code is still the code that exists in there. So Adoxio, which was a company that spun out of ADX Studio, which built the Power Pages code originally, took the code that Microsoft provided and put it onto GitHub. So if you're really wanting to dive deep into Power Pages, you can see what is like, the source code for most of what's still up there. So when you look at forms and lists and all that sort of stuff, a lot of that hasn't changed a whole lot over the last 7 or 8 years. So a lot of that code is still relevant. So you can look through the code to see if you can kind of diagnose, hey, why isn't this working the way I expect? You can go through that code and I still do it on every few weeks. I get a request in, and the way that I solve their problem is by going through the code and saying, yep, you know what, you may think it works like that, but I know by looking through the code it works like this. So as a pro coder, if you wanted to start getting a little bit more advanced, you could start exploring the XRM Portals Community Edition, which is what they called it, which is, like I said, the source code of the application from a number of years ago, but a lot of it is still relevant. Okay, so I'll quickly go through this stuff. So next call will be July 18th, same time, 3 p.m. Eastern. Again, thanks to Jason and the team at MS Dynamics World. Happy 50th call. I think what I want to do here quickly was just see if I could answer Gavin's question about the Power FX. So let me see if I can do that here. Okay, I'm going to pull this out. Okay, so we've got a site here. If I go into here and I go into Power FX and I enter some text in here, I don't know, if true, false. If I say save, okay, got it. I don't even know if that's valid PowerFX, but that should be enough to test it out. So now what I want to see is if I go to edit code, what does that look like? Because I've just put that into the content, I have to believe that we will just see that in the page markup, but I haven't actually tried it yet. So let's see here. So what do we have in here? Yep. So I'm going to say that yes, you can, like wherever you happen to put your stuff at, assuming that's going to be mostly in line in those things, my guess is that you do have, yeah. I don't know if that's valid PowerFX or not, but enter text. Okay, what if I do this? If, there we go. True, there we go. True, false. Save, let's try that. There we go, okay, that's a better thing here. Okay, now if I go to edit code, let's see what we get here. Yeah, so there's your syntax. So I have to believe that if you just were to edit that in following that syntax, that it's going to work. It kind of looks like almost like a little bit liquidy with the brackets and then FX. So my guess is that syntax, if you write it in that syntax, it's going to work. All right, folks, got 2 minutes left here. So I don't know if there's any other questions here. I don't see any. So Jason, I think we can wrap it up there.
All right, well, great job as always, Nick. Thanks to everyone in the audience for your time and attention and questions. We will be following up with recording information and a link to next month's event that Nick showed you the date and time for. So Nick, I think we will end it there. Thanks again.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day.